G'day guys, Mike with the Outer Circle, and we're going to be talking about the LVO preview for the Solar Auxilia. So we kind of predicted this was coming, and I think I hit pretty close to the mark with what I guessed would be in the initial release. Now, there's some positives and some negatives to this, and I think we need to break it down to two sort of key areas. One is the look of the models, the feel of the models, and the other is obviously going to be the price point because, well, let's face it, they're both very important equations here. So first of all, let's just look through and talk about what we think about them. So these are less detailed than the old Forge World models were, but in some ways they feel a little bit more crisp. In others, a little bit less sort of crisp. Judging from the way that the shoulder pads sort of sit over the cloth on the arms, they look to be a separate part or a part attached to the overall chest piece, because they basically are held on by nothing. As you can see with this guy on the left, there's a lot of airtime happening underneath those pads where they're not touching the actual cloth, which tells us obviously that, you know, it has to be a separate component, not attached to the arm for molding purposes. The las carbines have these big magazines on them, just to represent like the hot shot, the stronger version of them. They've got these different grenade packs. The exoskeletons on the armor are a lot less noticeable than the old sculpts. They've been simplified in detail. That's probably in part just due to the painting aspects. The old Solar Auxilia were quite tedious to paint, to put it mildly, because there's just so much detail in the miniatures. I'm curious as well about the scale on these guys. If they're 25s or 32mm bases, they look like they're 32mm bases, just because, I don't know, it's probably just in my head they are 25s, but there's just something about them looks, I don't know, they look kind of bulky, and yet there's still so much base around the miniature. I'll be curious to see how big they are next to the Space Marines, because if they've crept up in scale, or even if they're the same scale as the old Solar Auxilia, honestly, they were too big. And the whole new scale of the new Mark 6 Marines and such isn't going to work with them if they are indeed this sort of that larger scale, because they're going to be the height of a Marine anyway, which is, yeah, neither here nor there. But looks-wise, I think they look pretty good. Then we have this command retinue. I don't really care for that head there, the bare head. But the armor in that is fine, serviceable. Nowhere near as good or interesting as the old Solar Auxilia Lord Commander, Lord Marshal sculpt. But, you know, this is a command squad unit. This is usually the second tier of HQ, and there is actually a higher tier that will come on later, so I'm guessing there'll be another character to go along with this guy. This is basically just the lieutenant in charge of the command squad, and that will get a proper Lord Marshal, the higher tier of HQ, as a separate release to this. This guy here, the silver of his like little telephone sort of blends in with the busy miniature, so it just looks like he's sort of, it looks a bit like a Three Stooge. Like he's scratching his head with a finger in his mouth. No, what's going on? I don't know why. I just, it's an optical illusion from where I'm recording, and it looks really funny to me. But it looks nice too. Yeah, this is fine. I mean, with the augury scanner sort of thing here, and the arm pointing, yeah, I think a weapon in that hand, maybe holding the weapon by the stock, or around the front handguard, might have been a better look than the pointing hand, but I'm sure these being multi-pose plastics, there's a few options in there. Yeah, it's fine, looks good. This little banner is very imperial with the Solar Auxilia and such, very like a Roman Vexilia type thing. And I'm fine with it. I'd be interested to see if that lion's head on there, because that's sort of specific to some key Solar Auxilia units, if the lion's head is an optional accessory or not, because it's just in a very fiddly position to shave off. But apart from that, I've got no real complaints. I think the squad looks good, and I'd be perfectly happy with these. Then we have the Dracosan. So the Dracosan is pretty much as it was. Just sort of a faithful rendition of the Forge World tank. Interestingly, they've got a little void shield generator / refractor field device on the back there that I can see. As well as putting on some hunter-killer missiles, which I think just look awful. This is like harking back to the 90s in a negative way to me. Like, how does that even work? It looks like it's just you're holding a Stinger missile inside some sort of short tube, or I don't know. It looks really funky and is not my cup of tea. Doesn't make it a bad thing, it's just not my cup of tea. Yep, it's got the Demolisher Cannon and it's got the Twin-Linked Las Cannon option. The Demolisher Cannon is god-awful this edition and is only good for killing other Solar Auxilia. So I don't know why they've even bothered, because they've made so many weapons so bad this edition, and yet they've got a fixation on releasing all these vehicles. The Tank Commander crewman on top with his like boxy computer, which seems to be printing something out. There's like a piece of cloth coming out the bottom of it. I don't know why. I guess that paperwork's really catching up in the 41st millennium. You're heading into combat as a armored transport commander, and you got to sit there doing paperwork. Oh man, it never ends, the bureaucracy, in the military. I do notice that the driver's hatch here has changed significantly from the old vehicles, where it had its own trim and style, very similar to the Aurochs and such. That's gone. Strangely enough, that style, it's been replaced by this much more simplified and I think worse looking panel. So I don't like that aspect. And I'm also kind of disappointed that, although this is a faithful rendition, this is one of those few times where I'd be like, don't do a faithful rendition of the old model. Because the old model was limited by the technology available of hand sculpting, because the Solar Auxilia was on the borderline between the last hand sculpts at Games Workshop Forge World and digital sculpting and 3D printing, which is how everything is done at the company now. And it was restricted by being a Melkador chassis. It was a Melkador chassis that was, they built a new boxier central hull for it for the transport and added on like these transport doors. But otherwise it was the same everything. Dimensionally, and the guards on the tank, the exhaust system and motor at the back of the works. And none of it, this is why I ended up designing my own STLs for Solar Auxilia, because none of the vehicles match up. If you put these alongside the Aurochs and Carnodon, they look like they're from completely different design philosophies, completely different cultures design them. Then you've got, your Imperial Guard Sentinels out of 40k, which you can play in 30k alongside these. They don't work alongside them either, especially if you put them in around militia and such. So you end up with this mishmash of vehicles that all look dissimilar. And I think they should have gone down the route of making a Dracosan, like I might put some of my designs up here, making the Dracosan look more like like the Aurochs or the Carnodon tanks do, because they were sort of really unique designs that didn't just look like a hodgepodge of Imperial parts. They actually felt like something a bit more unique and definitely had its own stylistic flavour, which I thought was gorgeous. And I've tried to emulate. And it would have been nice to see them actually do that with this design. And I don't care if they make my 3D files redundant by doing so. I'd rather that. The tank commanders on top with the different pintle weapons, that's fine. Totally cool with that. And they all look good. Then we've got the heavy Sentinel. So controversial plot point here. I am mixed on my thoughts here, because cool that they've added this heavy Sentinel, and I'll be interested to see how its rules and war gear stacks up. Looks to have pretty similar firepower, but with the addition of the 2 missile packs and probably a little bit more survivable on the hull. But you compare this particular unit to the existing Sentinel, it's not really providing you a huge upgrade over that firepower wise. And the original Sentinel is pretty underwhelming in 30k compared to, unfortunately, Dreadnoughts. And you've got to make that comparison because you're paying surprisingly close points, full told for what you get. And points do matter at the end of the day, because not because you want to win all your games, but I relate it back to the price. You got to fork over real money for this, and if you have to buy 10 times as many units to get the same performance, that is a significant thing that has to be taken into account when it comes to critiquing these things. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're talking looks here, and looks-wise, I think these look good. It's just in fact, I think they look really good. I like this design with that sort of top-mounted weapon, although the whole Sentinel has to turn its entire body pretty much to aim the thing. But it's a shame that we didn't get the rules for this in the original Solar Auxilia book. The book is less than a year old, and a year old maybe, and we've got a new unit already being added to the book. You couldn't tell me they didn't have this in development. Like they say, it takes them 3 years to decide on things. They couldn't put it into that book. It's already that bloat that I complain about with these systems occurring, where it's like you've bought all the books required, but now here's more stuff, and it's not enough stuff to justify an extra purchase. Not like here's another 30 units in a campaign book upgrade. No, it's just like here's 1s and 2s and dribs and drabs, PDFs and campaign books and expansions. And I'm guessing these guys and their rules probably have something to do with another expansional booklet that's coming out, like the Siege of Cathonia, probably Solar Auxilia related. It's probably going to get previewed at the LVO, for all I know, like Siege of Cathonia. So we'll see what comes of that. It has a few interesting weapon options on top. Heavy Flamers, useless this edition, don't take them. The Volkite, not a bad weapon option. Autocannon, not a terrible option either. And the Incinerator, I think that is. It's fine. I also know that the same horrible looking... Just hear me out here, guys. See how it's in this big clamp? That clamp doesn't open up, right? It's just a solid tube of metal. There's a big rim on the bottom of this missile. How does that rim pass that tube to shoot out? Looks like the missile would start to move forward and then just jam in the socket. Last I checked, that would be a bad thing. I can't help it. I notice these things and they annoy me. Alright, the Leman Russ. Now, Leman Russ, this is a very interesting thing, because I thought they would just use the old Leman Russ, but do like a turret pack. This is a new kit. And I mean, this is a completely new kit from the looks of it. There is almost no panel that I'm looking at on this vehicle which is from the old Leman Russ, which it may be a modification of the old Leman Russ, redrawn, redesigned, but it's very interesting to note. And I also want to note here, limitations in the 3D sculpting, because this trim that goes all the way around, see how there's these tiny little round protrusions that are happening at each end of the trim to where the wheels are, but they're not consistently sized around each of the wheels. They're not deliberate. They sculpted the wheel with that gold round little bit here. You can see it's just got that bright line that makes the shape of it out. That would have been a part of the wheel, and when they've slotted those different components together, they didn't slot them together perfectly onto the vehicle. And instead of it being this nice flush bit of trim that goes around the vehicle, it bulges where each wheel is because of the alignment. Because they're like Lego bricks, slotting these parts together. And where they've intersected one another, they've stuck out. Maybe I can quickly do a little recording or something of me doing that, sculpting it in 3D to show you what's happened. But that's actually a flaw in the sculpting that made it all the way through the production process. Because you just wouldn't do it. You've actually made casting and molding the shape harder by including those and machining the die harder. So I've made many dies for plastic injection molding before. So again, these are the little things that stick out to me when I'm giving you my perspective. But as an overall design, I really like it. I just, again, why didn't they do something, especially with the tracks here? Put those Aurochs style track guards over the back half of this vehicle. Do something interesting with that instead of just keeping similar-ish shapes to 40k Leman Russes. Because this Leman Russ, the turret, the hull, that's all just copied from the Death Core of Krieg Leman Russ. They just had the parts sitting around and said, you know what, this is where the Solar Auxilia's pattern was the originator for the Krieg stuff. The only things that are different are the dozer blade and the front plate, realistically, from the old resin kits. That front plate with this sort of protrusion with the little steps in it, the gun mountlets, I love that. I think that looks really good, and I do like that as a unique design on these Solar Auxilia vehicles. So totally cool with that. I think that looks really neat, in fact, and I'm kind of kicking myself. I didn't think of doing something like that, but I was trying to emulate what already existed, as opposed to innovating too much. The dozer blade, with all the little protrusions in it, visually interesting. It would be terrible as a dozer blade, though. Anyone who's worked with plant equipment before or welded anything heavy, like I've worked with a lot of mine equipment, or you're just asking every one of those to snap off the minute you try and push some dirt. Back me up in the comments, people, if you've worked with tractors and other plant equipment, mining, agriculture, whatever it might be. You know exactly where I'm coming from. Those things every one of them would snap off. The closest thing that maybe has a shape like that is like a till or a hoe you might pull behind a tractor. And even again, it's under a very different load to pushing it into a mound like a bulldozer. But overall, I do think this is a gorgeous tank. I just would have liked to have seen them be more extreme with trying to diverge it away from the 40k aesthetic. Like I said, the Aurochs has that unique style with those curved sloping guards over the rear half of the tracks. If they put them on here, I would have said this is pretty much a perfect sculpt. And we've got the different turrets. Unfortunately, the only turret here that's really good in the game is the Vanquisher here. The autocannons don't put out enough firepower at the ballistic skill they have. Battle cannons are broken this edition, useless, never take them. Ruined, and they won't go back and fix them. And the las cannon's alright, but the las cannon, for the same points, you get a Vanquisher, which does everything the las cannon does, but better. So, then we get to the next guys along, so we get to the Veletaris here. So this is the next sort of level up from the basic las rifles. This is sort of your more elite troops choices. Not elites per se, elite troops choices. So, Volkites and axes, that sort of thing's what they have. I noticed this is just the Volkite onlys that we're seeing in there. Yeah, they look good. They look really good, in fact. It's just interesting that the Volkites, I feel, are a little bit small. Because again, let's compare them to the Legions. What are the Legions packing? I would have liked to have seen something a little bit bigger, because now they're resculpting it in plastic. Let's take advantage of it, right? Go a little bit bigger, but have it so it's like maybe, if those are familiar with the smart gun in Aliens, like it has a little, it's actually a Steadicam harness, but it has a little harness frame that attaches to the weapon, helps support the weight of the weapon. That would have been really cool to see used here. Like, the weapons are so heavy and cumbersome that they're getting exosuit is helping them to carry the weapon. That would have been really neat. But yeah, I love the sculpt. In fact, I love all of the sculpts I've seen so far. The Leman Russ assault tank adds more turret options to the armored squadron. So you get the incinerator, the plasma eradicator or something off the top of my head, and same sort of crew. Yeah, they look great as well. They look gorgeous. I actually really like the round plasma weapon, although what the hell happened with painting it underneath? Something looks weird there. Yeah, I'm not sure, guys, what's going on there. Whether that's a missculpt, a misprint, missed paint. If you know, let me know. But that wouldn't be the angle I showcased it from. Let's put it that way. It looks like it'll be relatively okay to magnetize. So we can swap out some weapons here. But again, demolishers are awful in the game. The Volkite weapon's not terrible, gives you good saturation firepower, but the plasma is probably the pick of the litter out of these weapon choices. And then we've got the Malkador, which, again, I wish they diverged more from the existing design a little bit. I mean, this is the classic design, but this is the classic 40k design. You know, make it feel more, like I said, like the Aurochs and the Carnodon and those other designs, and you compare it to like the new Sentinel, and there's a lot more curves and round shapes in those, and this is more angular, and it just feels like they're trying to force these all into being a coherent army, when they don't really feel like they're all the same. And this, in fact, has the old style. This is the hatch I was talking about on the front. This used to be the sort of hatch that the Dracosan had. So see how it's got like little handles on it. Has trim around. Then it's got like a little driver's miniature hatch, like a flap you can open up, kind of like a T-34 driver's hatch. T-34 World War II tank. And you compare that, I've got to scroll all the way back up now. You compare that to the Dracosan, it's now just got this little flap window. Just, it's a lot more boring, you know, than even a variant of this hatch design, which I think looks a lot nicer, a lot cooler, personally. But yeah, otherwise this tank looks pretty nice. It's just, again, I think they could have gone further with it. And also know that the flare shielding here is this separate sort of component that looks like a miniature void shield. And they didn't bring it out for Astartes tanks, it's just for these guys. Very, very strange. And then lastly, we have all these different weapon options that were being shown for it that are available. And unfortunately, many of them suck. It's just the state of affairs for weapons in the game. There are so many that are just not worth taking. And if you're paying so many points for this vehicle, and you can only get units of 1, as opposed to taking squadrons of 3. Multiple squadrons, in fact, for a single heavy support choice with the other vehicles, as opposed to the Melkador. I just don't see these flying off the shelves because they're so restricted by the Force Org chart, and they basically don't provide much more firepower than the Leman Russ does. Yes, I can put las cannons on the sides, for example, but the las cannons on the sides, as you can see, are recessed into the hull, so they can't point straight ahead, which is your best armor facing. To shoot at the enemy, they basically just point out to the sides. You've got to hope someone is in that side arc. So you end up taking, honestly, the Vanquisher and a las cannon to shoot straight ahead. But as you can see, it doesn't have a turret, it doesn't have a coax weapon. This is a limited traverse mounting, whereas on the regular Leman Russ, you can put a las cannon and a Vanquisher on it. This is Demolish Cannon, but you know, the other Leman Russ, Vanquisher, and the Vanquisher has a coax. So you have more forward-facing firepower on a Leman Russ, which you can get in big squadrons of multiples, because tanks are the killing power in Solar Auxilia. The infantry just don't cut it this edition, because everything is AP4, Strength 6, everything is just instant killed in Solar Auxilia. There's some real gameplay issues here, I feel. But, on the whole, an absolutely gorgeous set of miniatures. I think just constrained by the rules and riders who won't change, they're just... they are sticking to that road. They are sticking between the two lines. Amazingly so. And they really need to get off them. Now, that second point that I said at the start of the video, price. Price is a huge problem here. Because if we look over at the Astartes battle group with comparable number of miniatures, you know, swap the Dreadnought out to swap the Dreadnought to the Sentinel, swap the Land Raider to the Dracosan, and then garnish it with Leman Russ. You've got 25 infantry versus 30 infantry. This is 350 Australian dollars. This here, I need to get 3 sets if I want to have a functional army out of this realistically. And I don't really need some of these in triplicate. But you definitely want 3 Leman Russes. The Dracosans are take it or leave it because they're providing you a Gravis las cannon. But really what you need is you just need more Leman Russes. So in a way, the Dracosan is just wasted points, except for the rule of cool, right? Putting all your guys in a transport like that is cool. Although you lose a lot of transport capacity if you put the Demolisher on it. Just want to point that out. But you need at least 3 of these, so that's over $1,000, and that's just for a functioning like couple of las rifle squads and a single tank squadron. Now, Solar Auxilia, it is not uncommon to have 3 tank squadrons. So is that a $3,000 army there? If you're going off the battle group prices, I don't see this being any cheaper than the Astartes battle group. Why would they do that? That's not a Games Workshop move. You know, they don't make Cadians cheaper per model in 40k. Why would they do that with Solar Auxilia in Horus Heresy? So I see some real issues here. And of course, the Leman Russ is a great example of that. They're not going to make a cheaper Leman Russ, a cheaper Sentinel, or a cheaper transport tank in the Dracosan than what they produce for 40k. Because then you've made a line which is dramatically cheaper than its competitor. People will buy this over the competitor, and you've wasted all the resources you put into the competitor. They don't like that as a company, and I don't blame them for that. So financially, for this to be viable, it's got to come in at a similar price point to the Astartes. So that's 350 Australian for a box like this. Or more, 370, because they probably think that that Leman Russ tank there is probably worth more than 5 Space Marines is. Because, yeah, you get 30 Space Marines, and in this you get 25 Solar Augs and a Leman Russ. So, you know, all good looking. Like, don't get me wrong, I really want to stress that point. I do like the look of them. So, with that in mind, is this financially viable? And I just don't think it is. Because this is not 40k. In 40k, an army that's maybe twice the size of this would be a decent 40k army. Okay? You could add garnish a few extras in there. This would not make a decent army in 30k. Even at 3 times the size of this, that's like a 1,500 point army. You know, in militia, I could get 6 Leman Russes. No, in fact, I could get 8 Leman Russes, 2 squads of 10 Grenadiers, and a commander in like 1,200 points. Something like that for militia. Which are cheaper than Solar Auxilia, but not exponentially cheaper than Solar Auxilia. So a force like this, like I said, you get multiples of this box. Like 2 of this is like 1,000 points. The infantry are not expensive. The Leman Russ is not expensive. The Sentinel is likely not going to be crazy expensive either. The basic Sentinels aren't, and I don't see this being exponentially better. I see it being like, you know, extra toughness, point, an extra wound, maybe 2 extra wounds, and a tiny little bit of extra firepower, but still a ballistic skill poor. And of course, on the tabletop, these die in droves, because I really want to stress the point. This edition is flipping awful if you're playing militia and guard equivalent, which Solar Auxilia are. They're an elite guard equivalent, but they're still a guard equivalent. Toughness 3, 4+ saves. In this edition, everything is AP 4, strength 6 that you're going to get shot with. Just everything. The only things that aren't are bolt guns and heavy bolters. But think about how many assault cannons, Volkite weapons, like Volkite culverins. A 10-man Volkite heavy support squad will pump out 50 shots, which hit on 3s, wound on 2s, instant kill, no feel, no pain, no pass go, and for every wound they inflict, on a 2+, they inflict an additional wound, for every failed save, that is. And then you have to make an additional armor save for those. And they will just obliterate whole squads of Solar Auxilia with Volkite culverins. And there is just zero recourse that you have against that. And because this edition is also very cruel to vehicles with the way reaction fire works, do you want to fire a ballistic skill 3 Dracosan with its single Gravis las cannon when there are squads like Legion heavy support squads with las cannons out there who will incinerate the vehicle? It'll have a strength 8 boom boom, AP 4, which kills all the people inside. No, you probably don't want that. So it's a very cruel edition, and I really want to stress the point. And of course, if you go up against a Salamanders player, like an army like mine, where I can throw out per turn in my average 3k army 38, I think it is, 38 strength 6 AP4 template weapons, just kiss your ass goodbye. It's that simple. Salamanders are just a hard counter between the Melter and the Flame weapons to Solar Auxilia. You have zero recourse to fighting me beyond spamming Vanquisher cannons and hoping I don't target those first, which I will. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. This is a preview of the LVO miniatures. Like I said, 2 categories. Looks, they're a fucking 9.5 out of 10. Price, they're a 2 out of 10, because realistically, you need to buy so many of them. It is going to be prohibitive, especially with the way that the list design is created. Games Workshop needs to start doing deals for these Horde type armies where they discount them heavily, and you pay more of a premium for the Astartes or something, because just getting into them is just like pulling teeth. And if you're not going to make them cheaper than the resin miniatures were by a significant factor, then why are you bringing them to plastic at all? You know, beyond the fact that, plastic's easier to work with, jury's out. People have varying opinions on that, believe it or not. I'm one of them. Yeah. Anyway, back to our circle. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all on the next episode.